as an adult child, we look at our parents like when we were kids, right? And, we idolize our parents and our parents are our world. And then, the roles change where the kids kind of become the parents as the parents age. And so it's tough, and with memory care, it's much more of a willing process. It's much more of a hand-holding process to get, people to agree to make the move. I think there's a lot of guilt associated with it. They can't be that caregiver anymore.
Welcome to Desperately Seeking Senior Living, a podcast for sons, daughters, grandkids, spouses, and all caregivers who suddenly find themselves tangled in the search for senior living and care. If you like today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and check out our doable download in today's show notes for a printable summary of the show and a bonus tip. While no one can change the outcome of dementia or Alzheimer's, with the right support, you can change the journey. Tara Reid. None of us wants to be reminded that dementia is random, relentless, and frighteningly common. Lori Graham. Those with dementia may have a brain that works much differently than ours, but if we link our hands together, we can overcome anything. Teepa Snow. Hi, and welcome to the show. While it may not be the most comfortable topic, it's one that I'm tackling today with my special guest, Anna Burns with Ages Living West Seattle. Anna has spent years working in the senior living industry and has seen firsthand the struggles families face when it comes to Alzheimer's and dementia. In this episode, we are talking denial, memory care expectations, and tackling the stigma of dementia. Listening to our doable tips, short answers to your questions. Don't see your question listed? Send us a note. Then don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an answer. Welcome to the show.
Hi.
I am really excited to have you today. We are talking about something that I think is a little bit hard to talk about.
Yeah.
But I think it is so incredibly important. And that is the stigma around dementia. And I think we're almost talking about denial as well.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts? How are you seeing this with what you do? Because you work in senior living.
Yes. So historically, this has always been a thing. And I think it's just a really tough pill to swallow for family members, because I think, they're grieving a loss of who their loved one was. And
Yes.
So it's hard to, accept, what is happening. And so I think it's like grieving the loss of somebody that has not passed away, but their former self is not their current self. And so especially as an adult child, we look at our parents like when we were kids, right? And, we idolize our parents and our parents are our world. And then, the roles change where the kids kind of become the parents as the parents age. And so, it's tough, and with memory care, it's much more of a willing process. It's much more of a hand-holding process to get, people to agree to make the move. I think there's a lot of guilt associated with it. They can't be that caregiver anymore. And so what I hope to do, and maybe this is just a planting of the seed with this podcast, is really just give people peace of mind that that's what we're here for. So whether you have your loved one go to a community or you have home care or whatever is the best fit for your loved one, just embracing where they are now, meeting them in their journey, not trying to have them fit into our molds anymore, but meet them where they're at, and just know that memory care, that this stage of life, that this type of support is really going to give, all parties quality of life. So
absolutely. Because I think, first of all, you've mentioned grief. a few times. And
Yeah,
grief is also one of those uncomfortable feelings.
right,
And, we talk about Alzheimer's and dementia as being such a brutal disease because you are literally losing your loved one right in front of you.
right, right.
And and so I think there's a danger in not being able to face it because then you don't reach out like you're talking about and get those resources. I
Yeah,
think a lot of family caregivers are just out there gutting it out. Like they're just, trying to get through the day. And I think
yeah,
you're absolutely right. Part of that is that denial of
yeah.
not being able to see what's actually in front of them. What are some examples that you've seen specifically of what that looks like?
So there's a couple things. So I want to address, folks who are currently in an assisted living community and that transfer to memory care. So they've already taken that leap of faith. Their loved one is already, benefiting from being in a community, and we've developed that trust, and they know that their loved one is cared for. So sometimes just the in-house transfers from assisted living to memory care can be tough because they've already made that leap. They're like, oh, mom's being cared for. So sometimes it's that continuation of tough conversations that, although mom or dad or whomever it is receiving those assisted living services and, really benefiting from that, unfortunately, the disease doesn't reverse itself. Right. And so there is that continued progression. So just as there's a wooing process to have somebody move into a community to begin with, there's a wooing process to, at times, to have them transfer from assisted living to memory care. And when we talked
Yeah.
about the initial title of overcoming the stigma, it's, oh, they have to go to that level, or oh, down there. And it's this kind of downtrodden mood that
Yep.
emerges. And it's like, no, they're going to have more concentrated care. It's going to actually be better for them. And I think what people don't realize is that when somebody's further progressing in dementia, less is more, right? Here we have this gorgeous, big, beautiful community. And as somebody's progressing in their dementia, they can kind of get lost in the minutia of a large community or,
Yeah, what you're really talking about there is stimulation.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And just have less is more, having that smaller space to where they know where their apartment is, but they know exactly where to go for dining and having a meal or the activities. Everything in memory care is more centrally located, and they have a sense more of security instead of getting lost or inappropriately not being able to engage in activities the way they used to. So
Yeah.
really just wanting this to spin it as this isn't, something that's a bad thing when somebody needs to go to memory care. I want to spin it to where people really see the benefits of it and how their loved
Yeah.
one is going to get that more concentrated level of care. They're going to have more eyes on. They're going to be able to engage and it be appropriate and at their level. And not that that's a bad thing. It's a great thing. And so
Yeah.
that's what I want to hope to portray, moving forward, but also, for the sake of this podcast as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think so. Yeah, so that's interesting because I think you're absolutely right. I think that transition from assisted living to memory care, or when families walk in your doors, right, into an
Yeah.
assisted living that maybe also has memory care, and when they're faced with that nurse assessment, and then the nurse says, oh, they're not appropriate for assisted living. So it
Yeah.
can happen at both ways, in both
Right.
instances. Either they're walking through the door thinking assisted living, assisted living. So they've gotten, like you said, they've gotten
Right.
past that obstacle.
Right.
But then they're like, whoa, 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 what do you mean memory
Right.
care
Right.
already? So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That's where that stigma comes in. And I'm going to guess, I came from working at the community level as well in your same position,
Mhm.
right? That tour guide that's welcoming the families into the building. But I'm going to guess if we had an executive director on the show today, or that director of nursing, I'm going to
Yeah.
guess they have their own stories of
Yeah.
of how difficult those conversations are when they have to say to a family, yeah, they need memory care.
Yeah.
Finding memory care. What are some, yeah, what are some, do you have some specific examples of families that you've worked with
Well,
that you had to have this conversation? Because I
so yeah,
have. Yeah. So I'd love to talk about those specifics.
just, everything's about developing those relationships and trust. So when you talk about an executive director or, the lead nurse having those conversations. So yes, I have been a part of those conversations because typically I'm the first one that they meet and tour with and all of that. So they've developed that relationship with me, and it's kind of that passing the baton on to our executive director and the nursing staff, and everybody, is gaining the trust of these family members. And so, yeah, it's just, everything we do, we, document, and everything, when we get to that point of needing memory care is just sitting down with the families and saying, just like we talked about before, maybe they're not socially engaging properly anymore, or, we've got really, it's kind of the line in the sand, where I'm working is it's a question of dignity. If somebody's in the main dining restaurant area and they're grabbing food off of another person's plate, or maybe they show up in their nightie in the middle of the day, in the middle of the lobby, or, there's usually a pattern of behaviors that have happened. And, for lack of a better way to put it, I always say, when you're nowhere, right? When you're nowhere, and you can relate to those families. These are the behaviors that we've been seeing. It's becoming a pattern. And at the end of the day, it is a matter of dignity for your loved one. We want them, to flourish and to shine and really thrive, under our care. And so this
Yeah.
is that next stage. This is that next step. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
instead of having, yeah, go ahead.
Oh,
So,
go ahead. No, I was just going to say, yeah, I think this is also where I think it's really important for families that their loved one is, maybe, I like to call it, they're like living on the edge. They're like
yeah,
right on that edge
yeah.
where they might have some cognitive impairment, but they're still okay in assisted living. And I
Mhm.
think this is where pursuing options where the community has both assisted living and
Yes,
memory care can
agreed.
be really, really crucial. But when I worked in a building, we had this fabulous family, and their dad was so sweet. Like, he was the sweetest man, but he had left his home. He
Mhm.
got lost. A
Yeah.
stranger picked him up. And luckily, this was a
Really?
nice, a nice
Right,
stranger
yeah.
who got him back to his home and worked with him to find his son's phone number, called the son. And this event is what prompted the family to move dad into a community. But even though their dad had walked away and
Yeah.
gotten lost, they still wanted to see him in assisted living first.
Mhm.
And at this particular time in this particular building, we tried it. We said, okay. And their
Yeah.
dad's cognitive impairment was to the level that he thought he was purchasing a condo and that
Oh,
he thought he got to pick out the finishes. And so we went through that whole sort of, thing where we were working with him with finishes and colors and all of these things. Within 30 days, he was
mm.
moved over to memory care because he climbed the retaining wall
Oh,
in the building and got stuck, and we had to call 911. So this is that. So even when families have sort of, I don't know, I'll call it evidence,
yes,
right,
yes,
that there
right.
is cognitive impairment, it is still so hard for families to just get past that stigma.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and what I would encourage people to do is, if they have their loved one moved to assisted living and there is memory care, that's a part of that community, spend some time in memory care. I think a lot of it is the fear of the unknown, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so it's, I don't know what life is going to be like for my loved one. So it should be an open invitation at any community that you spend some time. Take a half an hour out of your day and just see what life is like, and you'll see that it's not scary. It's different. but it's more concentrated care, which again is more of a benefit to your loved one.
Yeah.
They're
And
going to have more eyes on, they're going to have more engagement. And,
yeah.
um, and our staff is wonderful, as I assume with other assisted living communities as well, that, they're in communication. Hey, this is what mom's day looked like today. This is what she participated in the way of an activity. And in memory care, it's more of a rallying of the troops, right? Because we know that, so if somebody's in assisted living, they can look at a daily calendar and go, oh, I'd like to participate in that activity, or they're going to self get them to a meal or what have you. Where in memory care, it's like, all right, everybody, it's time to eat. All right, everybody, let's go and, participate in music therapy or pet therapy or whatever, activity is going on. So it's really giving them quality of life, because otherwise people might self isolate, they won't participate in things. So again, just really spinning it to the positive. And I think just getting over that fear of the unknown. So how do you do that?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
just
And I
jump
think,
in, right?
yeah. And I think you touched on a couple of really important points. I think that, one of the things that I've heard over and over again over the years for families as they are spending time in that memory care, or maybe they're touring it for
Yeah.
the future,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Because they don't think that their mom or dad needs it right now.
Yes.
But what happens is that fear, and I don't even, it's fear of the unknown, but I think it's also fear of this is what mom or dad is going to potentially be like.
Yeah.
Because with
Yes.
memory care, you have all different levels,
Yes.
and dementia takes many different phases, right? So you have
Right.
early and mid stage and late stages. And so I think it's facing, like they're forced to then face that, wow, this is what mom might have to look forward to. Like this is what she might be. And so I
Yes.
think that's very difficult. And then the other thing that I think is super important that you brought up is the staffing. That is
Yeah.
such a valid point, because the staff in assisted living, they are not trained usually in dementia, right? So the memory care building now, unless you have cross training, which I love, but usually in assisted living, they're trained for assisted living. And then you
Right.
move over to memory care and they have that more specialized training.
Yeah. So we are very fortunate here that anybody from,
Do you
our
have the
general manager,
cross training?
we do have the cross training here. So
I love
so it's wonderful. But anybody from our general manager to the dishwasher gets dementia care and mental health training. Um, is it more specific in memory care? Is it more ongoing training? Absolutely. But you hit it on the head. We have the staffing, we have the training, we understand where they're at in their journey. And so we meet them where they're at. And again, just speaking to the quality of life from, both the resident and the family member. The family member doesn't have to serve as that caregiver anymore. It can be exhausting, right? So
Oh,
mentally,
absolutely.
physically, all across the board. So let us take the workload off of you. So when you visit with mom or dad, you're spending quality time. You get to have fun. You get to, maybe participate in an activity or attend a happy hour with them where we have musical entertainment, or simply watch a movie in our movie theater, right? So whatever it
Yeah.
is that's going to give you that quality time, let us be the caregivers. Let us take that workload off of you, and you can really have, again, quality of life for all parties involved.
Yeah, I love that. And I want
Yeah.
to go back to something that you kind of touched on earlier too, which were those clues. Because I think the more specifics that we can give our listeners, our families that are going through this, I
Yeah.
think it'll be easier for them to sort of overcome this denial or this stigma. So let's talk about some more of those clues, because with the gentleman that I mentioned earlier,
Mhm.
not only did he climb the retaining wall, but before that happened, he took apart all of his furniture and
Oh,
put the pieces in the hallway. That's a clue,
yeah. Yeah.
right? Another clue that we would notice, and you talked about the dining room earlier, another clue is when residents actually stop going into the dining room
Hmm.
because it's too overwhelming. And we see them stop at the lobby and they just sit
Yeah.
down and they never make it into the dining room. What are
Right.
some other sort of clues that you've seen?
So again, just not being able to appropriately socially engage, and sometimes because somebody might have a loss of finding words, so it's hard for them to communicate, right? And so if you're part of a social activity and you're not understanding what's being provided or what the activity is, and you aren't able to find the words to say, sometimes you can get ostracized from other residents because they're you're not able to do that, right? And
Yes.
so that's something that's really common. We touch base on not coming to the dining area. We see a lot of people start to self isolate because it's hard, especially when you're at that beginning stage, when you know that you have memory loss and you get embarrassed, right? And so we see people self isolate due to that. And then just again, inappropriate behaviors, someone coming out in their nightgown, like we spoke of, or, somebody walking out the door and, they don't know where they went or how to get back. That's
Yeah.
scary. So the gentleman that you had made mention where, thankfully enough, it was a nice stranger, but, that's a safety risk. So lines in the sand are a question of safety, dignity. We just want, to provide the optimum care and service for these loved ones, and just realizing that on the flip side, the ramifications of not getting them the care that they need could result in something bad happening. And not to instill
Yeah.
fear, but we have seen emergent situations where people needed placement right now because of something like that, because they
Yeah,
got
absolutely.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah. And this is
just
where I think it comes into play. Having a building that has both
right.
is
Yes.
really important because you
Yeah.
can handle an emergency.
Yeah.
And
Right.
the disease can change really quickly too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
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 And so, it's us because we have 24-hour care managers and we have 24-hour staff, and, just the way that our building is laid out, and, we have monitors on the doors after a certain
Hmm.
time. There's all of these things
Yeah.
in place to where, we are right there and can handle the emergency. Where, let's face it, we live in a busy society and most of our adult children are working. And if something
Yes.
goes awry, they might not find out about it for hours later. And so it's also a question of just the basics, getting proper nutrition. I have an example of a gal who moved her dad into a community that I had previously worked at. And he had been there for a week, and the primary concern was memory loss. And after him being there a week, she's just like, oh my gosh, he has just totally flourished. He's thriving. Well, we were feeding him.
Mm.
We were ensuring that he was hydrated and had water. I mean, when he was at home, and aren't we all a little bbit guilty of this? When we only have to worry about ourselves, it's like, oh, I'll drink some coffee or
Right.
a sandwich or something quick and easy, right? But and so especially our seniors, their appetites decrease with age. And so I can't tell you how many times I've said, well, tell me what you had to eat today. And it's that same thing. Oh, I had some coffee,
Hmm.
toast,
Yep.
anything else. And
No vegetables.
yeah,
No
and so
veggies.
no water, no vegetables, and so we food for energy. We need water for, all of that helps our cognition as well. And so just having somebody serve as that overwatchful eye for something as simple as that. And we see people thrive because they're being properly fed and ensuring that they're hydrated. So it's kind of
Wow.
that whole mind, body, spirit philosophy. When we're feeding all of those things, we see this breath of new life. And so
Yeah.
you see where, I always ask the question, what does a typical day look like for your loved one? And, a lot of times we get the answer, well, they used to do, XYZ in the way of activities. They used to be really active, whether it's physically or, they may have been an engineer at work or, what have you. And then now, um, mom's primary source of entertainment is watching TV after
Yep.
she's had her coffee and toast. And really, that's her day. Is maybe
Yeah.
she's lived in this large home that she raised the family in for 50, 60 years. And, whether it's the male or female, and their spouse may have passed away. So they're lonely. And really, at the end of the day, people need people. And so, if we're isolated at home, we're lonely, we're not eating right, we're not drinking enough water, there's no social engagement, we can see a rapid decline in the disease process versus getting all of those components fed, if you will. And then we see this breath of new life that emerges.
Yeah.
And we see,
Yeah.
again, I'm going to keep speaking to the quality of life, the quality of life for that person who has dementia and the quality of life for the loved ones who have had to be dealing with it and being those caregivers.
Yeah. And that actually makes me think of something else. And just I'm going back to the
Yeah.
importance. I think the importance of finding a place that has both
Yeah.
memory
Yeah.
care and assisted living. Now, listen, our listeners can make their choices. Like
Yeah.
there are lots of options out there, but you were talking about how mom lived in the same house for all these years. We see that so often. So there's a routine that is
Yes.
built into that. And any change when someone has cognitive impairment can cause a decline. And
Yes.
so I think that even though mom might be doing great in her house that she's lived in for 50 years, once you make that decision because she needs more care, that move to assisted living could actually trigger a decline if
Mm-hmm.
there's cognitive impairment. So
A very valid point there. Yes.
yeah. And so I think that's even more important to find a place that has that future memory care if there's cognitive impairment. And then the other thing that you were talking about is, oh gosh, what was it? Oh, I lost it. You said something really good.
Oh, okay.
Anna, what was it? Oh my gosh, you said something really good. Oh my gosh. It was a
mind, body, spirit,
oh gosh.
the
Oh, it was so important. It'll come back to me. It'll come back to me. But yeah, so I think yeah, and the nutrition, of course. Like that's so also so important. Oh, I wish I could remember what it was. It was so good. It
chefs
was so
just
good.
waiting to prepare meals for us.
Yeah.
It's nice to be able to just have that availability of, not only nutritious but delicious meals
Yes.
provided for us. And
Yeah.
I think just across the board, I'm going to use an example of a gal who did not have dementia but had moved into assisted living. And, it was a real struggle for her to make that decision. And so she had been at the community for a couple weeks, and, she really weighed heavily on moving into the community. And she was a pretty independent gal. It was the prompting of her children that, had her come to the community. And it was a similar story. She had lived in this home for years and years. She had recently lost her husband. And so just the kids had busy lives and just wanted to ensure that mom was cared for. But she was really much more on the independent side of things. So she comes up to me after a couple of weeks of being at the community, and she said, Anna, I didn't want to come here. I said, I know. I said, but tell me how you're doing now. And her whole demeanor changed, and she went, but I am so glad I did. And I said, well, yeah, tell me more about that. And she said, there was nothing wrong with me. She goes, I didn't need to come here. She goes, but I sat in my big home all by myself. And she talked about how she was lonely. And she said everywhere she looked, she saw her husband. And she said that she just knew she was meant to be at the community, and that, again, her quality of life just exponentially changed. There wasn't a need. She didn't have to come to the community, but just all of the benefits of being a part of a community environment, she was starting to reap those benefits and embracing them. So I tell that story because I always recommend that people make the decision sooner versus later to come to a community.
Yes.
And so, because it's really easy to remain status quo and not make a decision, right? But take that.
And then that plays into the denial part.
Right, exactly, right? And make the decision now while you can, and have that choice be yours versus waiting too long, and then it can be just kind of like a ripping off the band-aid. Oh, we got to do something now. To where if you're cognizant enough to start to make that decision now, wouldn't you want to have a choice of where you live for the duration of your life, versus kind of being thrust into something, because usually if we wait too long, there's an emergent situation that is happening,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, especially again, when we're talking about cognitive impairment, that
Yeah.
if there is any like
Right. Yeah.
inkling,
Yeah.
and I remembered what I was going to say that you were talking about. I think the other thing I just want to say to our listeners that are struggling with this, you mentioned families are busy. And
Yeah.
so I really want to recognize all of those families that are dealing with this, or
Mhm.
maybe we're going to say the D word, maybe
Yeah.
they're in denial, but
Yeah.
maybe it's because they're raising kids that are still at home. They're
Right.
working. They have so much going on in their
Yeah.
lives that sometimes that status quo that you mentioned is just them surviving and just
Right.
getting through this. But if they can, I absolutely agree with you. If they can try to do their research early,
Hmm.
if you are listening and this is you,
Yes.
if you
Yes.
can
Uh-huh.
try to just do that research early, it's going to save you so much stress when that
Yes.
time comes. When
Yeah.
there's that event, when there's, something happening, or mom is expressing how lonely she is, and, or that dad is walking away and getting lost. Like, right?
Scary
So,
things. Yes.
yes, yes. And so doing that research. So I just wanted to give that shout out because this is I mean, I literally just heard this the other day from a family, and I love this family so much. If you're listening, family, of course, I'm not going to name you, but but
But you
I
know who
just
you are.
loved it. I thought it was the sweetest. I've actually had that happen. I've had a family call me up and go, "Oh my gosh, was that episode about me?"
Oh, that's good.
And so for our listeners, everything that I talk about on the show is personal experience with families that I have worked with. And so this particular family, they were so sweet. They were like, "Dad's in memory care. The community made us move dad to memory care, but he doesn't need memory care. He's
Mhm.
fine." And then like a few sentences, like they wanted to move, they thought maybe that dad could move back to the assisted living side. And
Mhm.
then a few sentences later, they're talking about how when they take dad out to the doctor, when they come back, they're like, "Yeah, he doesn't even know where he's at. He doesn't even know
Yeah.
his apartment."
Yeah.
And I'm just like, guys,
Yeah.
um,
Here's some
I
here's
don't
some
think he's
clues,
going to
like you
be a
were
good
saying.
fit
Yeah.
in assisted living anymore. So, but
Well,
I think it's just, just going back to how much family caregivers have on their plate. It's
yeah.
just so hard to face some of these things, not just because of fear, not just because of the emotions and the sadness, but also just literally because they're so busy.
Yeah. Again, and the other thing I want to, pinpoint is that it's really risk free. I mean, I know it's a leap of faith. I know they're moving. Of course, there's costs associated with that, and it's the time and effort of making the move, all of those things. And those points are very valid. However, the majority of communities, it's month to month. You're not signing a 6 month or year long lease. You don't, have to be there for a certain amount of time. So I always, there's respite options, there's temporary stay options. And I have, told families, try us out, go ahead and try us out for a month and see how that goes. And 9 times out of 10, if they do try us out, they end up making the move because they realize that quality of life and the care that their loved one is getting versus being at home alone, and
Yes.
just all of the things that we've already highlighted. And so let us again take that workload off of you. And if you're on the fence, approach a community about a temporary respite stay. Ideally, we know again that the cognitive decline does not get better, right? So getting them into a community sooner versus later, and just like you trust your doctor, trusting the staff that, we're the experts in this field. Many of us have worked in the senior care industry for quite some time. And at the end of the day, we're going to do the right thing. If somebody is not a good fit for memory care, absolutely, we're going to recommend assisted living. But just trusting that if we're mentioning that memory care is a better fit, just again, it's another leap of faith, but trusting us with your loved one and knowing that we're going to provide them the utmost optimum care, and they're going to get not only the care that they need, but they're going to get, I just keep going back to that quality of life, right?
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
this is their golden years. It's time for them to retire in style. And so they could sit at home and watch TV all day, or they could participate in music therapy, or they could take a scenic drive on Alki Beach, or they could, whatever it is that we're providing. Would they get that at home? No.
Yep.
So why don't we give them, just that quality of life, enjoying their golden years, but also giving the adult children that peace of mind. You know what? No matter what, my mom is taken care of. My dad is taken care of. So
Yeah. Yeah,
I hope that's helpful.
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I love that. And also, it's that opportunity, and I think you mentioned this earlier, of family caregivers being able to be the son again, being
Yes.
able to be the daughter again,
Yeah.
and knowing that mom and dad are in a safe place and that you don't have to worry. What percentage of the time, you mentioned cost, what percentage of the time do you think denial is based on cost?
I feel like that's changing in a positive light because people are becoming more educated. If we rewind in time, assisted living is only about 35 years old,
Yeah.
right? And it used to be, your loved ones were either at home or they would go to what we used to call nursing homes, now skilled nursing facilities. And assisted living was born, if you will, about 35 years ago, and it's come a long way, right?
Hmm.
So the programming, the care. So I think people are definitely becoming more aware and educated of the cost. Sure, there are times where people, you're definitely educating them on how it all works, but for the most part, it's all inclusive in the way that, all utilities are included, all meals are included, all the activities that we spoke of,
Yeah.
transportation. It's this big list of amenities of things that are included. And so when you really do a cost comparative of, okay, what is mom or dad spending at home now versus it's one bill out of community. And so you don't have to worry about, oftentimes when somebody experiences cognitive decline, the adult child now has to take over the finances. So, you have to sit down and pay that, rent or mortgage bill, plus the water, the utilities, the this, that, the list of bills where out of sheer convenience, it's one bill alone here. Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
so yeah,
I've run into that before. I've run into it being a cost issue where they look and they go, "Oh, mom's on the edge between memory care and whoa, memory care is how much?" Because memory care is more specialized, it's more expensive generally. And so that is definitely something that has come up before with
yeah,
families that I've worked with, is that they're like, well, can't we just stay in assisted living a little
right,
longer where it's
right.
a little less expensive? So I just wondered what your experience was with that, because I feel like I've seen that a couple times. But
We
anyway, yeah.
always, yeah, I have no qualms about talking about the financial piece because obviously that's a huge piece of the puzzle,
Oh,
right?
yeah,
So,
of course. Of course.
just not only will I voice what the costs are, but I usually write it all down for families so they can really do that financial planning. And I think again, most often than not, people are expecting, what the cost might be. I mean, sure, has there
Yeah.
been times where you get big eyes and, oh, I didn't know it was going to be that much. But I just think, when we do a comparative, I think most often than not, it's comparative to what their monthly bills are now versus what they would spend, in
Yeah.
memory care. And especially if they were to get home care, that's going to be
Yeah.
an expensive cost. And so I think, whatever the right fit is for the family, we just hope to be a resource for them and let them know that there is help out there. So whether you choose my
Yeah.
community, a different community, I'm just happy that you're doing the search. You're reaching out for help because that's what we're here for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really love that, because there is a segment of our audience of family caregivers that they don't have that private pay funding that other
Yeah.
families have. But I still think it's important to start your research because there are different programs. There's
Mhm.
Medicaid, and I say this all the time. We're very lucky in Washington State when it comes to state pay and Medicaid. We have a lot of options here.
Yes.
And so, but again, even if finances are a concern,
Yeah.
absolutely, I think it's so important to start your research early. And when you're able to face what's right in front of you, what those clues
Mhm.
are, that cognitive impairment that might be there, that dementia, that Alzheimer's, when you face it, then you're able to do that research. When
Yeah.
you're not able to face it,
Mhm.
then you're more likely to not do the research and find yourself in a position that's a little bit more of a struggle. So I think that's really important too, to kind of point that
Yeah.
out, that not everyone is going to have those resources. But Anna,
Yeah.
I really just love everything that we're talking about today. I
Yeah.
mean, I think this is so important. But and I always ask all of my guests, what would be, with everything that I know we've talked about a lot,
Yes.
but what would be your number one doable tip for families who might be in that situation where they have that little voice inside them that's telling them there's something
Yeah.
wrong, but they're just not ready to face it?
Just reach out for help. Ask the question. It's not saying that you have to move mom tomorrow, but the longer you wait, you're going to be in the same situation, and perhaps that situation will be worse the longer you wait. So start asking the questions now. We are the senior care experts. This is what we do every day, all day long, right? And so don't be afraid to ask the question, because if I don't have the answer for you, I guarantee I will find out the answer for you, or find a person who will have the answer for you. I always kind of joke and say, and Valerie, you've been doing this for a long time too. We know enough to be dangerous, right? So we know
Yes.
enough to be dangerous. I think at the end of the day, we wouldn't be in this industry if we didn't have the heart for it. And so, yes, would I love to have, any and all the seniors that we're working with move into my community? Sure. But if for whatever reason it's not a good fit, I will direct you, in the way that you should go. And so I just have to be, again, that resource for people. So, yeah, my words of wisdom, my advice is just start asking, start doing some research. And, that way you've got a really good understanding of, what programming, what community, the cost, all of those things. And it'll make you that much more comfortable to make that decision while you still have the option of choice.
I love it. This episode is brought to you by Ages Living. At Ages Living, you're home. And here, the days are bright and full. At Ages West Seattle, they embrace the salty sea air and inspiration from Puget Sound and Alki Beach with saltwater aquariums and nautical themes. At Ages Living, everything is designed with residents in mind. Find more information in show notes. Check out this episode's doable download in show notes for details, including industry terms and definitions we discussed, as well as a bonus tip from our guest. Have questions or your own tips to share? Leave us a message. We'd love to hear from you. And until next time, make it doable.